This is the Daily Growth Discipleship Podcast. I'm Josh.
And I'm Chris.
St. John of the Cross wrote, "In the happy night, in secret, when no one saw me, nor I beheld aught, without light or guide, save that which burned in my heart. This light guided me more surely than the light of noonday, to the place where he, well I knew who, was awaiting me, a place where none appeared. The dark night of the soul is a bitter-sweet place where pain and growth meet. It's a place where you feel completely alone, as though God will never be near again." And in this chapter of our conversation, Gretchen tells her story of the dark night of the soul and what it was like when she felt God wasn't there. We often have those mentors in our own spiritual lives, the people that we look up to for wisdom, guidance, and insight. We often look up to them because they've experienced what we've experienced. We look to them because we want to find in some way that what we're experiencing isn't unique and that we're not alone.
I've found you don't always have to know these people personally to sort of be mentored by them. Sometimes you can find a mentor from people who have been gone hundreds of years through their writings or from afar. But are there any other particular mentors that have helped you along in the faith similarly?
Well, I can remember when I first started growing and I still had young children. We lived out in the country, and so I would put on a certain radio station in Tallahassee, Florida, that had a lot of preachers on it. And Charles Stanley was one of them, John MacArthur. And so I would listen to them, going to and from town. And so I grew a lot in just all the sermons I heard from Bible studies. Beth Moore and Anne Graham Lotz were two of my favorites. And then, as you speak about older people that are just dead and gone, Brother Lawrence's book, I love a lot of the classic scholars. So, Brother Lawrence, I gained a lot from him. Hannah Whittle Smith, Andrew Murray, I had a voracious appetite for reading when I first began to learn what was available to me. And I think I liked older authors and classics more than contemporaries a lot of times. I just love how God has been eternal, and what he did in someone's life, 500 years ago is still so very relevant to me today. And it can explain so much of what I'm going through, even terms like, the dark night of the soul. I can remember when I was, I think it was like year 2000, I was going through a real struggle and seemed very confused by it. And then I remember reading about it in My Utmost for His Highest. And one of my favorite devotionals is Streams in the Desert. And just, certain older classics bring to light what's still going on today. And it is a rich resource.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I ask you to elaborate a little bit on that dark spot? That is one of the questions we like to ask people is, how we deal with or how they've dealt with certain difficult spots, because we think, at least, the church doesn't do a good enough job sort of expressing those stories and really talking about what they are. And I love that you brought up the dark night of the soul, because that is one of the best sort of images of what it is to go through these dark periods of internal suffering and striving. But when we come through them, that's when we often experience, we looking back, we can tell that we've experienced the most growth, or that Jesus was walking with us closer than he's ever walked with us before.
And I've been through one personally here in the last 6 years. Started, probably 6 years ago. And I think one of the things that would really, really help Christians is if they could learn that these dark nights of the soul are fairly common for Christians, but it doesn't seem like that's the message that we hear from the pulpits nowadays. Mm-hmm. And so, what was it like for you going through that, and
how did you maintain a passion for Christ going through that or coming out of it?
I didn't learn about the terminology of it until towards the end of my time. So I sort of muddled my way through it for, it seems like, much of the time.
Mm-hmm.
But the way I would describe it, I think there's two different ways we experience hard trials. Sometimes it deals with discipline and sin, but what was a marked difference in sort of the dark night of the soul kind of experience is that it did not have to deal with sin. It dealt with pruning. Because in my nature, I'm a perfectionist, and I'm really trying to get away from that. I call myself a recovering perfectionist, but I'm going to stop even saying that, because just a couple of days ago, I learned something that, only God is perfect. And I really feel like perfectionism is idolatry. And I'm like, man, I really have to distance myself from, those tendencies. But anyway, so as a perfectionist, I'm all about trying hard. And, a perfectionist will gloss over and ignore the 99 things that are right, and they hone in on what's wrong. And they can exhaust themselves trying to fix it. So when I started going through my dark night of the soul, at first I began to just self-examine a lot. And I tend to normally self-examine anyway. And I think that is probably what motivates a lot of my writing on my website, is that, I am asking myself questions and wanting to learn and understand from the Lord what's going on, or what do I need to do differently, or what do I need to perceive differently. So I had that habit about myself anyway. So as I began to examine and think, what have I done wrong? Why am I not feeling close with the Lord? I could not come up with anything. I mean, there was no unrepentant sin. And so I just sort of dug deep. I tried to be more devoted. And it was like God was a million miles away. I did not feel close to him. I just felt like he was very silent. I know My Utmost for His Highest talks a lot about the darkness. And that word, darkness, and silence from God, those described the dark night of the soul. Is you don't feel close, you can't figure out what's wrong, you're trying hard to remedy it, you long to be close again. But I think someone who's going through a dark night of the soul is someone that's already tasted of the intimacy with Christ. So then when you sort of remove that intimacy, it's very disconcerting. It's painful. It's you don't like it at all. You can almost become a little frantic about it, trying to figure out what is wrong. And then you mix in just sort of the conditional love we're used to on this earth, and you begin to think there's surely some way I have displeased the Lord, and it's some kind of punishment. Mm-hmm. But that's the thing about the dark night of the soul. You just have to persevere. And I can remember thinking and praying to the Lord, I don't know where you are, and I don't know where I am. I can't even judge if I'm in the right, if I'm in the wrong. And I would just pray, you're going to have to come find me, because I don't know where I am anymore. And usually that time period is not a quick period. My season lasted about 1.5 years, and it usually deals with just more than one area of your life. Like, I can remember thinking, if someone looked at my life on paper, there was no reason for me to be feeling the way I felt. Everything was pretty much going okay, but yet I was miserable on the inside because I did not feel close to God. I did not see any spiritual growth in me, and that's another frustrating part, because I knew it had to be some kind of work of the Lord, but I saw no fruit. And then that was discouraging, because as a perfectionist, what do you do a lot? You're measuring.
Yeah, you gotta have the fruit.
Persevere through a lot if I feel like I'm progressing. And I can remember getting towards the end of it, and looking back as I came out of it, and in hindsight, I could see great gain. There was much fruit, much righteousness that came from that time period. But during the time, it was a time of feeling confused and distant from the Lord.
Gretchen, thanks for sharing that part of your story. If you're listening to this today and you're going through one of these dark nights of the soul, I want to encourage you. It may feel like God is not there. It may feel like you're distant from God and that nothing will ever make you happy again. But remember what the psalmist said in Psalm 42. He asked, "Why are you downcast, O my soul? Why so disturbed within me? Put your hope in God, for I shall yet praise him, my salvation and my God." God has not left you in the middle of this dark night of the soul, and eventually the darkness will lift. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Daily Growth Discipleship Podcast. If you're listening to these episodes and don't want to wait anymore for the full conversation, go to dailygrowthdiscipleship.com and join the Daily Growth community, and we'll give you instant access to the full conversation. If you don't mind waiting, be sure to check out our next chapter in this conversation, where Gretchen talks about what she went through when the darkness finally lifted.